So up till now we talked about two methods of asexual reproduction. We discussed fission, the three types of fission, that is irregular, longitudinal and transverse, and then we talked about budding, two types of buddings, exogenous and endogenous. So in this chapter of reproduction in organisms, let us take up other methods of asexual reproduction. The next method that we are going to discuss is, this is the third one, it is fragmentation. We will discuss two things simultaneously here, fragmentation and regeneration. Fragmentation, as the name tells us, that the parent body divides or breaks up into fragments or pieces, and each piece gives rise to a new organism. Fragmentation is normally seen in filamentous alga, for example Spirogyra. So there is a long filament, this filament breaks into parts. It can break accidentally or due to constrictions or dissolving of the wall. This is having cell wall, so suppose from here the wall dissolves and from here also the wall dissolves. So we will get 1, 2 and 3 fragments, and each fragment will now give rise to a new organism. So basically parent body splits or breaks up into fragments or pieces. Regeneration is also pretty much similar, but regeneration term is normally used in case of animals. For example, here, okay, so in example of fragmentation, let us write Spirogyra, whereas in case of regeneration we talk of animals like Planaria. Now the interesting thing about Planaria is that it can show binary fission also and it can show regeneration also. So in case of Planaria, its body, it shows constriction from the middle. The body starts to stretch. The anterior end fixes at one point and the body starts to stretch, or the posterior end will get fixed at one point and the anterior end will start getting moving forward. So it stretches. As a result, we start seeing a constriction. So here a constriction appears and this complete organism breaks up into two parts. Each part gives rise to one organism. Now here it is undergoing splitting to produce two, and that is similar to binary fission, but there is a power of regeneration which is present in lower organisms, like in case of sponges also, in Planaria also. If this planarium is cut into various parts, each part is capable of regenerating into a complete organism. So that is the basic small difference between fragmentation and regeneration. The next method of asexual reproduction is by spore formation. Various types of spores are formed. If the spores are motile and have flagella, then they are known as zoospores. Zoospores we have seen in lower plants like algae, Chlamydomonas, Spirogyra, Eulothrix. So here we can write examples of Chlamydomonas, Eulothrix, Spirogyra. In all these motile flagellate spores are formed. Now these spores, they are drop-like, they can be biflagellate as we see in case of Chlamydomonas, and they can be quadriflagellate 1, 2, 3, 4 like we see in case of Eulothrix, but they would have flagella. Such kind of spores are known as zoospores, the motile spores with flagella. In fungi, the spores are either called basidiospores like in case of mushrooms. In case of rhizopus, let us take fungi. In a fungus, that is rhizopus, that is bread mold, the structures that sporangiophore is produced. At the tip of it there is a swollen bulb like structure which is known as sporangium, and it produces the spores which are known as sporangiospores. So here they are circular non-motile spores, but individually they are released from the sporangium. If you take the example of penicillium, in case of penicillium, these spores are produced in a chain. So in penicillium, from the hyphae arise these small structures which are again sporangiophores, and they produce these spores which are in a chain. Such spores are known as conidia. So in penicillium, conidia are formed. These structures are called conidia, and these will be detached from the tip. So new ones would be added from the bottom, and the completely formed spores will be released from the top. These conidia have reserve food material, so they contain sufficient food. In some fungi, they don't have reserve food material. Then those structures are known as oidia. So they are same, but they don't contain enough reserve material. Conidia can withstand adverse conditions, oidia cannot. Sorry, oidia they cannot. Reason, they don't have that much of reserve food material. So spore formation, which is a characteristic feature of lower plants like algae and most of the fungi, because fungi reproduce by spore formation. Now let us take the next method of asexual reproduction, which is called vegetative propagation. In vegetative propagation, some vegetative structure, that is stem, root or leaf, any of these structures help in propagation or reproduction. Vegetative reproduction has been reported in plants naturally. There are many plants which reproduce by this method naturally, but we will talk about some artificial methods also by which we can get the same type of plant, but it is artificial method. So let us talk about the natural methods first. Natural methods of vegetative propagation. First, by stem. The natural methods where stem helps in formation of new plants. One example is rhizome. Rhizomes are underground stems and they are swollen thick for storage of food. So they store food. One example which we always take is of ginger. When we see ginger, the shape is irregular, and on this structure we also find some lines. these lines are actually nodes, and on these nodes are seen some vegetative or adventitious buds growing. These buds also have the same kind of nodes. So, it is a bud. What is this swollen structure? It is a stem, modified stem, and this stem is producing a bud which will give rise to a plant. So, stem is helping in vegetative propagation. The example is ginger in case of rhizome. Turmeric is also an example of this, plus ferns. In ferns also the stem is in the form of rhizome. And sometimes when we see a younger rhizome which is just taken out from the ground, here we also see a thin kind of papery structure that is actually a scaly leaf. So, if you see a papery structure, those structures are scaly leaves. So, here rhizome, which is a modified stem, underground stem which is meant for storage of food, is helping in vegetative propagation. Another example of underground stem which helps in reproduction is tuber. Tuber, the most common example is potato. When we see potatoes, we see some scars. These scars are actually called eyes, but these structures or these scars are the places which are nodes, and node has meristematic tissue. If you leave these potatoes for a little longer duration of time, you find there is a tiny yellow structure which grows here, and if you allow it to grow, it grows into a plant. So, those are again adventitious buds. So, this is also a bud which is going to give rise to a new plant. And these new buds or plants would always arise from these scars. So, these scars are nothing but areas of nodes, and nodes are the characteristic feature of stems. So, tuber, and again it is meant for storage of food. So, for storage of food. One more modification where stem helps is called corm, C-O-R-M, corm. We find this modification in colocasia. Colocasia or alocasia. They are little longish, and again there are distinct markings which are visible. And from this markings which are nodes, we can see the scaly leaves also, and from the same point we would find a bud also growing, and this bud would also have the similar kind of markings. So, this is also for storage of food, this is also a swollen structure underground, and here also the adventitious buds grow which give rise to the new plant. So, all three examples which we have talked about here are underground stems modified for storage of food, but they are also helping in vegetative propagation, and this is naturally happening. We are not doing anything, the plant on its own performs this process. Let us take one more modification where stem only is going to help in vegetative propagation. These three were underground. Let us talk about something which is on the level of the ground. They are called runners. In case of runners, the plants are small and tiny leaves. The branch runs parallel to the surface. It is on the ground. So, there is one stem which is running parallel to the soil surface, and wherever the node comes in contact with the ground, again it gives rise to a plant. Again, this plant will have a horizontal branch, and wherever it comes in contact with, the node comes in contact with the soil, it will give rise to a new plant. So basically they are creeping on the ground. They are called runners. One example of this is cynodon, which is known as doob grass. So if we pluck one plant, the others also get pulled because there is a connection between the two plants, and the connection is of the stem. So here also stem is helping in propagation. On the ground, if structure goes below ground but same type and it is not meant for storage of food, it is known as sucker. Everything is same, only difference is, suppose this is the first plant, its leaves, the branch is slightly underground. So we would not see such kind of connections. There is a connection, but the connection is underground. And again, the node will give rise to a new plant. This plant will again give rise to an underground branch. So this is the one which we have drawn here, is a branch which is on the ground, almost parallel on the surface of the ground. This is also a branch, but this is underground. This is seen in case of mint. So here also there is a connection between the plants. Only thing is we don't see that connection, but if you uproot it, you might find that there is a connection which is pulling the other plant also. Similar modification. In case of runner, it was lying parallel to the surface. In case of sucker, it is underground, and in this case, which is known as stolon, it is above the ground. But above the ground, again, this is the first plant, its leaves and branches, and the stem, it goes like this. It is not touching the ground all along. It is above the ground, but it is subaerial. If it is above the ground clearly, then we call it aerial. If it is underground, it is underground. It is slightly above the ground. It is known as subaerial. And it bends wherever it comes in contact, the node comes in contact with the soil, again it will give rise to a new plant. Again there is a branch which is subaerial. So this is a subaerial branch. And every time it comes in contact with the node, it gives rise to a new plant. So there are three modifications. One, connection is a branch which is flat on the ground. Again connection is a branch, but it is underground. And in case of stolon, again there is a connection of a branch, but it is slightly above the ground. A similar type like runner, if it is in water, then it is known as offset. If same kind of plant is in water, then it is called offset. So offset term is used for an aquatic runner, but there is a technical important thing which we need to know is that if this is the aquatic plant, and as we are drawing aquatic plant with the bigger broader leaves, the branch is on the water surface and there is only one internodal difference. That means one node is here, the next node is here. So between two plants there is always one internodal gap. One internodal. It is aquatic and there is one internodal gap. Whereas in case of runner, sucker or stolen, there can be multiple internodes. That means there can be one node here, but that does not give rise to a new plant, next node, third node and so on. So there can be more nodes and internodes, but in case of an offset, there is always one internodal. That means from one node, one plant, other node, other plant. The example of offset is Eichhornia or water hyacinth. Eichhornia or water hyacinth, which is also known as terror of Bengal. It is an exotic species which was brought. Exotic means it is not indigenous, not from our country, but it was brought from somewhere else. It was brought because of its beautiful looking leaves, and it was introduced into the ponds because it is an aquatic plant, just to increase the beauty of those water bodies. But this grows so fast that it covers the entire pond within few weeks. So now it has become a threat. It is competing with other aquatic plants for the food. So it is taking all the nourishment, all the oxygen from the plant, and other plants and aquatic organisms are getting deprived of it. So that is why it is called terror of Bengal. Eichhornia or water hyacinth reproduces by offset. Same as runner, only difference is it is aquatic, and between the two plants there is one internodal gap. So these are some modifications where stem is helping in reproduction. There is one more, which is bulb. Example of bulb: onion, garlic, lily. In a bulb, when we cut a bulb vertically, we see a hard disc-like structure here, and there are leaves which are around it. This much part is underground. So the leaves which are underground, they are non-green and slightly thick. They are meant for storage of food. And the leaves which are above the ground level, they become green. So in case of spring onions, the lower part, which is the onion part, is whitish in color. The leaves here are white, and as you see the upper part of it, it turns green because this is the part which is exposed. So these are fleshy leaves for storage of food. This disc which we see is the stem, and arising from this disc are many thread-like structures. These are adventitious roots. In this stem, suppose we just stretch it to see the structure. If this becomes the disc and one leaf arises from here, the leaf always arises from a node. This leaf would also arise from a node, and in the axil there can be a bud. So again, the stem is going to help in vegetative propagation. Bulbs can be simple bulbs and compound bulbs. Like in case of onion, there is only one, whereas in case of garlic, there is one fleshy leaf and around it its own scaly leaves. Again one more, which is known as the clove. So here individuals are there, and each clove has its own cover, and complete bulb is also covered with the tunic. So it is known as a compound bulb. This is called a simple bulb. It can be tunicated, that means there is a scaly leaf cover, which we see in case of onion as well as garlic, but non-tunicated in case of lily. So in lily you will not be able to remove the skin of that bulb. So stem only helping in vegetative propagation. All these methods are naturally occurring where stem is helping in reproduction. Now let us take the other part, that is roots helping in vegetative propagation.